Good morning, good morning. This is Uche Njoku, Sneaker Principal, and welcome to this episode of the Sneaker Principal podcast. So yesterday I had a conversation with some colleagues about leadership. This is an ongoing thing for me. I'm often pulled into these conversations about what leadership looks like in education. What does it look like to lead a school, to make decisions that moves a school forward? And for those of you who are not aware, in New York City, unlike many other locations, being a school principal is so much more involved than just, walking around the hallways with your big bunch of keys, with your walkie-talkie, and kind of commanding kids to get to class or get to detention, the things you see on TV. I always find it funny that that's the perception that we're like some kind of wardens, high-paid security officers who are just there to make sure that order is maintained and kids are in the classroom. Yeah, there's sometimes, there might be some consideration about instruction, but that's something that's not really talked about as much, in popular media as far as what we do, managing, supporting teachers to be better at teaching. And in all reality, most schools suck at that because the expectation is that the principal or the assistant principal are experts in instruction, which we know is not the truth. Because imagine going to a hospital and the CEO of the hospital is the expert at everything in the hospital. So whoever runs the hospital is the expert in the ER, expert in gynecology, expert in internal medicine, expert in oncology. Like, we know that is virtually not possible. But these are the things that are reality in a lot of schools in New York, and also in a lot of schools across the country. This expectation that you are good at everything, and I argue against that. I think you should have your expertise as the grounding point of what qualifies you as a teacher. But it's no in the world for you to be like the best person in the building at math or in English language arts or in science. There's just no way possible, unless you're just like some kind of savant and you just have some incredible genius around all content areas. Not possible. No, don't take that back. It's not impossible, highly improbable. That makes more sense. Then what is it exactly that a leader should be good at? What is exactly that a leader in the school building we should be able to look at them and say, yes, this is what qualifies them to lead a school. This is what qualifies them to even be called leader. And I think it's different for every school. Some schools need someone who could help guide or maintain culture. And what I mean by culture is creating a stable environment for all constituents in that building, whether it's students, teachers, the support staff, the parents, the families, the community itself. For a lot of communities, the school is one of the central points, because think about this. It's in the school that the children are being groomed. And let's call it what it is. I know groomed has become a thing that's negative, but a child is being groomed to be a participating citizen in that community. They learn all the things that they need to be able to do so that when they become adults, they can step into the roles that's needed in the community to sustain that community. So culture is very important. And that culture should be a culture that is actually in line with the culture of the community. That being that the community has a very positive culture. But if the community is struggling with culture, then the school should be the beginning point of retraining, grooming members of that community to be better. And this is something I've seen over the course of my career across New York City. I've worked in 2 different boroughs. I've worked in 3 different states across pre-K through 12. And I've worked in places where the culture is 100% in line with the community. And you know that the school is just is playing its role in stewardship in maintaining the culture of that community, making sure that the kids understand this is how we do things, this is who we are, and this is why we are excellent. But now, there are other types of leaders that are needed. Not necessarily culture. It might be a little bit aligned, but another one is engaging in work that allows for the acceleration of learning. So I'll give you an example. I mean, there's no real example here. It's just a fact. Some communities are great, good people, but needy. Needy in the sense that there is a deficit within the schools that is recognized, and that deficit has to do with factors that are out of control of the community. So if you have a high immigrant community, things like language and things like literacy might not be high, but as people are coming with, especially if they don't speak English, they're coming with a deficit in language, speaking, reading, writing in English. So what ends up happening is you have children who are learning alongside with their parents, new culture, new language, new all these different things, versus those communities where people have been there for generations. It's a different type of learning. So you find yourself doing a lot of remediation, preferably acceleration of learning to get those children up to par. So by sheer nature, in those schools, in those communities, the schools might not be performing as high as school communities that are more established, or where the people are more established in the country or in that community. So not to say a school is any worse than the other, it's just that here we're learning language, we're learning culture, we're learning things that are not congruent to what's happening at home. And in some cases, it's hard because that community might be housing a plethora of different people, different cultures, different nationalities. So again, leading in that space is very different because now you are trying to create a space to not just get kids ready for different exams and standardized exams and measure assessments to measure their progress towards, middle school, high school, even college. So now you have to lead in that space. Responsibilities are very different. If I had a homogeneous community, talking to them and supporting them and establishing culture is much easier than going to a heterogeneous community where it's like, okay, I might be speaking in English and I have to have what I'm saying translated into Mandarin, into Spanish, into Russian, into whatever cultures exist in that space. Makes things a lot more complicated. Just even people understanding each other makes things a lot more complicated. The nuances of culture and language makes things so much more complicated, And so how do you lead in that space? So you have one that's about culture, maintaining, managing culture, of a homogeneous community. Another one is, establishing, growing culture in a space that is more along the lines of a heterogeneous community where now you have to kind of juggle different things that are happening in these spaces. And it's something that's very interesting because, again, how do you lead in those spaces? And the question is, should you be leading in that space? So the course of my career, I've been offered opportunities to lead in homogeneous spaces that are highly successful, well-established communities. The kids, the families, everyone in that space is just like, We've been here for years. We do really great. And look at all these great things about our community. And I've struggled with that because being a kid who grew up in a very unique cultural environment, being West African, then grew up in South Central LA, and even though early on I was like the only kid I was the exotic kid, right? In my schools, because it was typically, excuse me, typically African American or Mexican, Central American, right? Families, but they've been there for so long, so there was like a homogeny that's been established based on like Los Angeles culture. So they understood each other. I was the odd man out. So, but then as time went on, more and more immigrants were coming in from around the world, and all of a sudden, in my school, you had, in my high school, you had Vietnamese, you had, there was a young man who was German, all these people who were there. So after a while, you have to realize that there's more commonality between us immigrants, even though regardless of where we came from in the country, the world, than those who were established there. And when I became a leader here, an educator in New York, that was just the norm. You walked in most schools, it was just like the mixture of people. And for me, I understand that. I understand the immigrant experience. I understand what it feels like to be new into a country. I understand what it is to struggle to understand. Even though English is the lingua franca of Nigeria, where my family's from, but the nuances of speaking English here is very, very different. The things that we would say and how we would say it in Nigeria was very different from how it was being said and used here in America, because Queen's English and American English, even though the bedfellows are essentially different. The inflections and how things are said and why things are said and the words are being used. I had to relearn that. But again, that experience has helped me be effective as a school leader in culturally diverse school communities. And like I was saying earlier, me being offered opportunities to be in much more successful, much more high-performing school environments, I just couldn't do it, because that's not how my brain is conditioned. It's not what I'm used to. I understand learning and establishing and becoming part of something versus being in a space where everybody's the same for the most part. So my leadership skill sets allow me to be better in those spaces versus spaces where those spaces where they're more is heterogeneous, it's more diverse, and people there are all trying to figure out their place, especially here in America, that they are relatively new to, or in most cases, they're in the margins of. They're not quite considered, Americans. So for me, in those spaces, it's so much easier because I understand that experience, but that experience is one that I had growing up. So, so as a leader, you have to know what is it exactly that you are, built for, that you are most capable of being successful within, and that's something that I've been thinking about, because in our conversations, people keep asking me, or saying to me, "Oh, this leader is not a good leader for this reasons," and I'm like, no, it's not they're not a good leader. They're not leading in the right environment, and they might not realize it. Are their skills really, grounded in what they do best versus, or not even what they do best, what they could do best versus just going after a principalship or just going after an assistant principalship, and that's something that people don't think about until it's too late. Because I've seen a lot of leaders go into spaces and they are struggling, and they think it's because they're not a good leader or they're not being supported. And I will say, is that the right environment for you? Are you best suited for that space? Or are you in a space where you have to kind of learn and and drudge through the experience of understanding how things are done in this space. And there's a lot of that needs to happen in any space you walk into to lead. It has to happen. But does it have to happen in the sense where you feel like you're functioning in like this day one mentality where you're like, how do I make sense of all this? How do I, survive long enough to understand and establish myself? It's hard to establish yourself as a leader in a space while you're learning how to lead in that space. Or better yet, you're just learning the space because you're building the buses you're driving in. And the thing about being a principal in a school is that bus is moving so fast most of the time that you don't even realize, when you are in top speed. All you know is that you're floundering, and you maintain balance, and all of a sudden it becomes your norm. When in the whole reality, that was the wrong bus to get on. I guess what I'm saying in this podcast is it's very important that as you are seeking leadership roles, to ask yourself, what is the best space for me to lead in? What are my skill sets? What kind of community do I want to lead in? Rather than just chasing the title, chase the community. Don't just chase the title. Don't just say, hey, it's an opportunity for me to be a principal. It's in Brooklyn. It's here and there, down the street from my house. Is that school community most conducive for your skill set? Where have you worked over the course of your career? Where have you been most successful? Because that will, have a significant impact on how you lead and how you walk into a space. It doesn't matter whether I was in Brooklyn, whether I was in the Bronx or in Nevada or in California. I walked into spaces that I understood. I understood the children, I understood the families. I had a common experience so that when I walked in there, I can lean on that experience and I can see things happen before, I can see things happening that most people would understand because I've been there. I get it. And that's one of the things that's very, very important. So right now, as you listen to this, I'm going to wrap up. I'm going to ask you this question. If you're a leader right now, are you in the right space? Are you in a space that is maximizing your skill sets? Why did you pick the school you're in right now? Was it just, hey, it's opening here, come take over the school? Or are your experiences and your values in alignment with that school and that community? So when you walk in, parents, students, teachers see you as someone who understands, or are you in a space where you're trying to figure it out, where you're learning, And it's the learning itself, which learning is always a good thing. Don't get me wrong. Learning is essential. It's what we do as educators. We're learning. But however, the learning needs to be done. Is it so wide and so deep that you're missing the mark in leading? And do you have the time? Do you have, some cases, when you walk into a community, it might take 2 or 3 years for you to become fully comfortable in that space, and not even that, for the community to be comfortable with you. There's nothing worse than walking into a space where the families, the students, the teachers are like, oh, the principal is nice, but they don't understand. That sucks. They want to be in a space where people know. They know that you know. You know that they know, and you're on the same page. So when you're trying to resolve problems or build something, it's a communal act. It's not you trying to convince them or them trying to convince you, and you're not on the same page. Because remember, again, as a principal, or even an assistant principal, you're stewards of a community. You're either maintaining it and making it better, or you're building it so it could be better. But it can't be from your personal experience from outside of the community. You have to understand the community. Understand what the community wants, what the community needs, because it's a collaborative process. Then the work is engaged upon. So again, call to action. Tell me in the comments, how did you pick your school community? Or if you're looking to become an assistant principal or principal, how are you picking that? Do you know where you want to go to? Do you know why? And what's your intention when you're in that space? What do you plan to accomplish when you're in that space? All right, y'all. This is Uche Njoku, Sneaker Principal. Thank you again for your time. And till next time, be well.